He thought losing her was the worst thing that ever happened, until he walked into a restaurant 2 years later and found her again, holding his 3 daughters. The statement slipped from Andrew Keller's lips with a bitterness he could no longer hide, though he kept his posture impeccably straight, the way a man of his status was expected to. "My parents have already chosen a bride for me," he said, and the words tasted metallic, like a confession he had been forced to choke down for far too long. Anyone watching him from across the polished conference table would have thought he was calm, collected, in control, the perfect young CEO, the heir to a business empire built on steel, glass, and ruthless precision. But his calmness was only the surface. Beneath his tailored suit, beneath the steady tone of his voice, Andrew felt trapped inside a life he hadn't chosen. His brown eyes, usually sharp and unreadable, flickered with the frustration he never allowed himself to show. The arranged engagement had been whispered about in his family for months, wrapped in words like legacy, advantage, and reputation. His parents had presented it as a practical opportunity, a union between 2 powerful families, a strengthening of bonds, a guarantee their name would remain untouchable. The chosen woman, Lauren Hart, fit every strategic box: elegant, controlled, flawlessly mannered, with dark hair, icy blue eyes, and a cold beauty that had always reminded him of a winter landscape, breathtaking, but impossible to feel warm beside. She was the kind of woman his parents approved of instantly, because she looked like someone who knew how to play the game. And she did. She played it flawlessly. But Andrew did not love her, had never loved her, and never would. He respected her ambition, even admired her composure, but there was nothing in her that stirred the part of him capable of giving his heart away. That part of him had been claimed years ago by someone entirely different, someone who didn't belong in the curated world his parents tried to mold him into. Avril King had been the opposite of everything Lauren represented. A radiant blonde with clear blue eyes and a smile that softened even the sharpest edges of his long workdays, she had walked into his life with simplicity instead of strategy, sincerity instead of agendas. She never cared about boardrooms or reputations, she cared about him, the real him, the version that didn't wear a suit like armor. And then she disappeared. She left 2 years ago with only one message: "I'm sorry. I have to leave." No explanation. No warning. Nothing. She slipped out of his life like a ghost, leaving him with questions that clawed at him night after night. He had searched for her everywhere, refusing to accept the silence she left behind. He hired investigators, checked hospitals, traveled to places she had mentioned in passing, but every trail died as soon as it began. It was as if the world had swallowed her whole. He replayed their final days over and over, trying to understand what he had missed. Had he failed her? Had he said something unforgivable? Was she in danger? Was she gone forever? 2 years of unanswered questions left scars that even his wealth, power, and relentless work ethic couldn't cover. He built walls around himself, walls that his parents mistook for maturity and discipline, but in truth they were forged out of heartbreak and exhaustion. Inside those walls he kept the memory of Avril, her laughter, her warmth, her perfume that smelled faintly of vanilla, everything he couldn't erase no matter how hard he tried. So when his parents cornered him with their final announcement, the engagement would be formalized soon, the families already celebrating, something inside Andrew finally cracked. He didn't shout or protest or argue. He simply stated the truth with the steady voice of a man who had lost too much to pretend anymore. "My parents have already chosen a bride for me," he repeated quietly, not because he accepted it, but because he was tired of fighting battles he couldn't win. But even as he said those words, a part of him still clung to the memory of the woman he'd truly wanted beside him. Avril's disappearance had left a hollow space in him that Lauren's presence could never fill. His parents assumed he had moved on, that time had washed clean the wound. They didn't understand that love like his didn't disappear, it lingered, stubborn and painful, echoing in every corner of his life. Standing by the window of his office after the conversation ended, Andrew gazed out over the city, its endless lights, its restless pulse, its promise of possibility. He wondered for the 100th time where Avril was, if she was safe, if she ever thought about him, if she knew how desperately he had tried to find her. The thought that she might never return tightened around his chest like a fist. He didn't know it yet, couldn't know it, but the quiet, aching life he had resigned himself to was about to shatter. The answers he had spent years searching for were much closer than he imagined. And the moment that would change everything, the moment he would see Avril again, not alone but with 3 little girls who carried traces of him in their eyes, was already approaching, faster than he could ever prepare for. The restaurant his parents had chosen was one of the most expensive in the city, a place where crystal glasses sparkled like diamonds and every whispered conversation sounded intentional. It was the kind of venue meant for public displays, for planned photographs, for subtle negotiations disguised as family dinners. Andrew Keller sat at the round table draped in immaculate white linen, trying his hardest to maintain the expression of polite indifference his parents expected from him. Lauren sat to his right, her posture elegant and rigid, a perfect model of composure. She looked stunning in a fitted navy dress that matched her icy eyes, but Andrew didn't feel a thing when he looked at her. No spark. No warmth. Nothing. She noticed, of course, she always noticed, but she kept her smile fixed in place like a mask. His mother talked endlessly about guest lists, charity events, and the image their families would present after the engagement announcement. His father spoke about future investments, merging assets, long-term strategic partnerships. The entire conversation circled around money, prestige, and societal advantage, while Andrew silently counted the seconds until he could excuse himself. Lauren occasionally slipped her hand onto his arm, a gesture meant to appear intimate, but it felt intrusive. He forced himself not to pull away out of sheer courtesy. If he was being honest, he didn't even know why he showed up tonight. Maybe habit. Maybe guilt. Maybe the small part of him that still believed avoiding conflict would keep the peace, even though avoiding conflict had never brought him anything but exhaustion. He stared down at his barely touched glass of wine, wishing he were anywhere else, wishing he were with someone else, someone whose absence still hurt like a bruise he pressed on by accident. He had just begun mentally rehearsing the moment he would stand up, tell his parents he was done with this farce, and walk out, when something shifted in the corner of his vision. A strange, instinctive flicker crawled through him, like a memory tugging at the edge of his consciousness. He lifted his eyes, scanning the restaurant casually at first, until he saw her. And then everything inside him stopped. Avril. She was standing near a table by the window, illuminated by soft golden light from the chandelier overhead. Her blonde hair was pulled into a loose, practical style, and she wore simple clothes, nothing glamorous, nothing designed for attention, yet she shone brighter than anything in the room. Her blue eyes were focused on the 3 little girls squirming in her arms and around her legs. Triplets. 3 tiny girls who looked like clones of each other, brown hair, warm brown eyes, tiny hands reaching for napkins and spoons with chaotic energy. Andrew blinked, unsure if his mind was playing tricks on him. For a moment the entire restaurant blurred around the edges, the noise fading into a low hum. He stood so abruptly that his chair scraped loudly against the floor. His parents turned toward him in confusion. Lauren tightened her grip on his arm, but he barely registered any of it. His heart slammed against his ribs, wild and painful. 2 years of searching. 2 years of unanswered questions. 2 years of imagining every possible scenario, except this one. Except her standing there, alive, real, breathtaking, with 3 children who carried unmistakable pieces of him in their eyes and hair. He moved before he could think, weaving through tables, ignoring the startled looks from strangers. He felt like he was walking through water, slow, heavy, disbelieving. Avril finally sensed someone approaching and turned her head. The moment her eyes met his, her face drained of color. Her lips parted in shock, as if the one person she hoped never to face again had just materialized in front of her. Andrew stopped only a few feet away, breathless, overwhelmed. He needed to touch her, to confirm she wasn't another dream he'd wake from. But he didn't dare reach out. Not when she looked so startled, so vulnerable, so ready to run. "Avril," he said, his voice soft and raw in a way he hadn't heard from himself in years. "It's you." One of the little girls gazed up at him curiously, her wide brown eyes shining under the chandelier. She tugged at Avril's shirt, making a soft sound as if seeking reassurance. Another leaned against Avril's leg, clutching a small stuffed rabbit. The third peeked out from behind her mother's hip, studying Andrew with an expression that felt eerily familiar, cautious, observant, evaluating. It was the same look Andrew often gave strangers. His breath caught. 2 years old. Brown hair. Brown eyes. His eyes. His hair. His features. His blood. All three of them. And Avril, trembling, defeated, terrified, was clearly bracing herself for the moment she had been running from since the day she left. "I didn't expect to ever see you again," she whispered, her fingers tightening around the strap of one of the carriers. "Not like this." Andrew swallowed hard, unable to form a single coherent thought. The weight of the moment pressed down on him so strongly it almost forced him to his knees. 2 years of pain, confusion, anger, longing, all of it crashed into him at once. He ignored the chaos behind him, his mother calling his name, Lauren rising from her seat in disbelief, the hushed voices spreading through the restaurant as people recognized him. Nothing mattered except the woman who had shattered him and the 3 little girls who had quietly rewritten his entire life. The silence stretched between them, trembling under the weight of everything left unsaid. Andrew felt the edges of his carefully constructed world peel away, revealing something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time: hope, fear, and a fierce, instinctive love he didn't yet know how to understand. He finally found his voice, though it felt fragile, uncertain. "Avril, are they?" He couldn't finish the question. But he didn't need to. The answer was already staring back at him in pairs of warm brown eyes. Avril closed her eyes briefly, and when she opened them again, they were filled with something achingly familiar: sorrow, regret, and a depth of love she had never dared show him before. "Yes," she whispered. "They're yours." And in that moment, everything Andrew thought he knew about his life broke apart, only to begin shaping itself into something entirely new, something terrifying, something miraculous, something he could never, ever walk away from. Andrew didn't remember leaving the restaurant floor. One moment he was standing in front of Avril, staring at the 3 little girls who carried his features, and the next he was guiding her toward the terrace at the back of the building, away from the curious stares, the cameras, the judgment, and the questions he wasn't ready to answer in public. The night air was cooler than he expected, brushing against his skin in a way that almost grounded him, but nothing felt real yet. Avril walked beside him silently, her steps cautious, her arms full as she shifted the 3 toddlers who clung to her like they sensed the tension radiating from both parents. The triplets were alert now, wide awake after the commotion inside, their tiny faces curious as they looked between their mother and the stranger who was suddenly staring at them like they were the world's most fragile miracles. Andrew opened the terrace door and let Avril step outside first. The space was quiet, dimly lit with soft golden lamps and a few potted plants, a stark contrast to the noisy restaurant behind them. Avril placed the girls in their double stroller and a carrier attached to its side, adjusting blankets and wiping tiny hands as if the routine helped her stay steady. Andrew watched her, unable to look away for even a second, because now that she was here, real, breathing, alive, he was terrified she might disappear again. She finally straightened, but didn't look at him immediately. Her hands trembled slightly as she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The silence stretched, thick with years of unanswered questions, and Andrew could practically hear his heart pounding in the stillness. When she finally spoke, it was in a voice so soft he had to lean closer to hear it. "I didn't want you to find out this way," she whispered, her eyes dropping to the stroller as one of the little girls reached for her finger. "I didn't want them to see you before I was ready. Before you were ready." Andrew swallowed hard, struggling to hold back emotions that threatened to spill from him all at once. "Avril. I've been looking for you for 2 years. Every day. Every month. I thought you were hurt, or lost, or—" His voice cracked, to his humiliation, but he couldn't stop it. "And the whole time you were raising our children alone?" She winced, her shoulders curling inward as if bracing for the blame she expected. "I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't even know how to face you after what your mother said to me. And then everything happened so fast. I was terrified. I made decisions I thought were protecting you, protecting them, and maybe I was wrong, but I didn't know what else to do." Andrew felt a chill crawl down his spine. He stepped closer, searching her face for any sign of exaggeration or misunderstanding, but every line of pain on her features was raw and honest. "What did my mother say to you?" he asked quietly, even though he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. Avril pressed her lips together, squeezing the stroller handle as if it were the only thing keeping her steady. "She came to see me after our fight," she finally said. "She told me that I wasn't good enough for you. That your family would never accept someone like me. She said my presence would ruin your future, your reputation, your company, everything your family worked for. And then she said that if I stayed, the children would live their entire lives being hidden, denied, treated like a mistake." Avril's breath hitched, and she lifted a hand to her mouth to stop it from shaking. "I was pregnant already. I found out days after she came. And I panicked. I thought, maybe she was right. Maybe I'd ruin everything for you. Maybe the children deserved better than to be hated before they were even born." Andrew felt the words slam into him like a physical blow. His mother. His own mother. The woman who had raised him to value strength and loyalty had been the reason he lost the woman he loved and never met his daughters until today. Rage coiled inside him, dark and dangerous, but he swallowed it for now. He couldn't shatter in front of her, not yet. Not when she already looked like she was waiting for him to walk away. "Avril," he said softly, stepping close enough that she finally met his eyes. "You should have come to me. You should have told me." Her expression twisted, guilt and exhaustion blending into something heartbreaking. "I know. I know that now. But back then I was alone, scared, overwhelmed. And when I found out I was expecting triplets." She let out a shaky laugh that wasn't a laugh at all. "I could barely breathe. I didn't know how to handle the pregnancy. I didn't know how to do it without you. But I still thought leaving you was the only way to save your life from spiraling into chaos." Andrew ran a hand through his hair, feeling the weight of her words like bricks pressing down on him. His gaze drifted to the stroller where the 3 girls sat watching them curiously. One reached a hand toward him again, and his entire body stilled as if responding to an invisible pull. He slowly extended a finger, and the tiny girl immediately wrapped her tiny hand around it, gripping him with surprising strength. His breath left him in a shaky exhale. "She looks like you," he whispered. "All 3 of them look like us." Avril's expression softened with a pain that looked dangerously close to hope. "They're good girls," she said quietly. "Strong. Smart. A handful, but they're everything to me. And they're mine," Andrew added, his voice deeper, steadier. "They're my daughters." Avril didn't deny it. She only nodded, slowly, helplessly. He looked at her again, not with anger, but with a pain she couldn't meet. "You carried them alone. You raised them alone. You struggled alone. And I didn't know. I didn't even know I was a father." "You weren't supposed to," she whispered. "I thought keeping you out of this would protect you." He shook his head, his voice low and rough. All it did was destroy both of us. A breeze swept through the terrace, stirring Avril's hair and making one of the girls yawn sleepily. The world felt strangely still, as if holding its breath. Andrew stepped even closer until he was only inches from her. He didn't touch her, he wasn't sure he had the right yet, but his presence wrapped around her like an unspoken vow. "Avril," he said quietly, almost desperately, "I'm not letting you disappear again. Not you. Not them. Whatever happened before, it won't happen again. I swear to you." She closed her eyes, tears gathering at the edges, and for the first time since he found her, her shoulders relaxed slightly, as if she was finally letting go of a burden she had carried too long. And Andrew understood, this was only the beginning of a story far more complicated than he could have imagined, filled with secrets, grief, love, and the fragile hope of something better. But he also knew this, he wasn't losing them again. Not now. Not ever. Andrew barely remembered leaving the terrace, but he remembered the instinct that drove him, a fierce, protective urgency that grew with every second. Avril and the girls needed to get away from the crowded restaurant where his parents, Lauren, and half the city's elite were dining. They needed safety. Privacy. Space to breathe. He guided Avril through a side exit used by employees, his hand hovering near her back but never quite touching it, afraid to push her, afraid she might flinch or retreat if he moved too fast. The triplets were already dozing in their stroller, their tiny breaths soft and rhythmic, oblivious to the storm forming around them. He opened the door of his car for Avril, helping her lift the girls carefully inside. The entire time he fought the overwhelming urge to ask her 100 questions at once. The drive to his penthouse was almost silent except for the sound of the city passing by outside. Avril stared out the window, her profile bathed in the glow of passing streetlights, and Andrew couldn't stop glancing at her. He still couldn't fully believe she was there. After 2 years of searching, nights of waking from dreams of her crying or calling his name, she was sitting right beside him, carrying the children he never knew he had. When they arrived, the elevator doors opened directly into his private residence. The penthouse was spacious and minimalistic, filled with warm light and soft colors, but suddenly Andrew saw it through Avril's eyes. It looked empty. Too quiet. Too lifeless for a home that now needed to hold the laughter and chaos of 3 toddlers. Avril hesitated at the threshold as if afraid she didn't belong there. Andrew stepped aside, careful not to rush her. "You're safe here," he said, his voice low, steady. "No one will bother you. No one will touch the girls. And you can leave whenever you want, I'm not trapping you here." She finally walked in, pushing the stroller gently. The girls stirred, and one let out a sleepy squeak, tugging at a blanket. Avril knelt to fix it, her hands moving automatically in a gesture that told Andrew she had done this alone countless nights. The sight sent a sharp ache through him. He watched her quietly before speaking again. "Avril, you said my mother threatened you. You said she told you the children would ruin everything. What exactly happened?" Avril exhaled shakily, brushing a hand through her hair. She didn't look at him at first. Instead, she walked toward the large window, gazing out at the glittering skyline as if grounding herself in something steady. "It was the night after our fight," she began, her voice soft but steadying with each word. "I was emotional, scared, and trying to figure out how to talk to you again. Then she showed up at my apartment. She didn't even knock, she used her influence to get inside the building." Avril swallowed, her hands tightening into fists. "She told me that you were destined for something greater than what I could ever offer you. She said I would drag you down, ruin your future, ruin your family's name. She told me that I was a problem that needed to be removed." Andrew's jaw clenched, fury spreading through him like fire. He had always known his mother could be controlling, manipulative, ruthless when it came to the family's legacy, but he never imagined she would go this far. Avril continued, her voice trembling now. I tried to argue, but she kept pushing. She told me that if I stayed, she would make sure your career collapsed, that investors would withdraw, that your father would turn on you. She said you'd lose everything. Her gaze dropped to the floor as she whispered the next part. And she told me that if I was pregnant, which she somehow already suspected, she would ensure the children were never accepted. She said they'd grow up resented and hidden, treated as a shameful secret. She finally looked at him, her eyes filled with the fear she had been carrying alone for so long. I didn't want to believe her. I didn't want to hurt you. But I was terrified, Andrew. I had no one to talk to. And when I woke up a week later and found out I was expecting triplets. Her voice cracked. I couldn't risk your future. I couldn't risk theirs. I thought disappearing was the only way to protect all of you. Andrew moved toward her slowly, the weight of her words sinking deep into his bones. She had no right, he said, his voice low and dangerous. No right to interfere in our lives. No right to force you out. No right to keep me from my children. Avril's shoulders shook, but she met his gaze with honesty. I didn't want to raise them alone. I didn't want to leave you. But everything she said made me believe staying would destroy your life. He stepped closer until he was only a breath away. He didn't touch her, not yet, but the intensity in his voice softened. My life was destroyed the moment you left, Avril. Not because of the scandal, not because of my parents, but because I lost you. And I didn't even know I lost the chance to be a father. Tears filled her eyes, but she blinked them back quickly, as if afraid to fall apart in front of him. I thought I was doing the right thing, she whispered. I thought that if I stayed far enough, you'd be safe. Andrew shook his head, the truth burning in his chest. The only thing that ever endangered me was losing you. And them. He glanced toward the stroller, where one of the girls was now quietly sucking her thumb. They're mine, Avril. My daughters. And I missed everything. Their birth. Their first steps. Their first words. I'll never get those moments back. She flinched as though he'd stabbed her with the words, and the grief on her face nearly undid him. I know, she whispered. And I'm so sorry. For a long moment they simply stood there, the silence heavy and fragile. The city lights glowed behind them, casting reflections across the glass, illuminating the two people who had once loved each other so deeply but had been forced into darkness by lies and fear. Andrew finally reached out, slow and gentle, brushing his fingers against hers. She didn't pull away. We can't change the past, he murmured. But we can change everything from this moment forward. Avril's breath hitched, but she didn't look away. And as the triplets slept peacefully beside them, the first fragile thread of hope began to form between two hearts that had been broken for far too long, a thread that would soon become something unbreakable. Andrew woke before sunrise the next morning, not because of an alarm or a business call, but because his mind simply refused to let him sleep. Hours had passed since Avril told him the truth, hours that he spent replaying every moment of the last 2 years, every unanswered question, every empty night, every fruitless search. For the first time, he saw the full scope of the manipulation that had stolen his future, and the realization burned through him with a cold, steady fury. His mother had engineered everything: Avril's disappearance, his suffering, the years he spent grieving a woman he thought had abandoned him. She had taken away his chance to be a father from the moment his daughters were born. It was a betrayal deeper than anything he'd ever imagined himself capable of enduring, and the consequences of it pulsed under his skin like an old wound torn open. He stepped quietly out of his bedroom to check on the guest room he'd prepared for Avril and the girls. When he opened the door, he froze for a moment, overwhelmed by the sight before him. Avril was lying on her side on the bed, already awake but perfectly still, as if listening to the rhythmic breathing of the 3 tiny bodies curled between her and the edge of the mattress. The triplets were sprawled in a cluster of blankets, their small faces peaceful, soft hair rumpled from sleep. One of them had her hand resting lightly on Avril's arm, as if ensuring their mother wouldn't drift away. Andrew stood there silently, leaning against the doorframe, absorbing the image of what his life should have always looked like. A family. His family. The realization sent a deep ache through his chest, an ache made of love, regret, determination, and something newly awakened. Avril noticed him and sat up slowly, her movements careful not to disturb the girls. Her eyes met his, searching, unsure, afraid of what his expression might hold. "We should talk," Andrew said quietly. Not harshly. Not with accusation. But with a gravity that made Avril straighten her spine. He motioned for her to join him in the living room once the girls fell back asleep, and she followed him silently, her gaze drifting nervously over the penthouse that still felt too luxurious, too empty, too unfamiliar for someone who had survived alone with 3 babies. Once they sat down, the atmosphere shifted. The silence between them was no longer fragile like last night, it was weighted, steady, and unbearably honest. "I'm going to confront my parents," Andrew began, his voice low, firm, unwavering. "Not tomorrow. Not next week. Today." Avril's breath caught. "Andrew, your family is powerful. Your mother. I don't care." The words came out faster and sharper than he intended, but he didn't regret them. "They lied to me. They manipulated my life. They made you run. They made you terrified. They made me believe the worst about the woman I loved. And they stole 2 years from my daughters." Emotions flickered across Avril's face, fear, relief, guilt, hope. "I don't want to be the reason your family falls apart," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You aren't the reason," Andrew said, leaning forward so she couldn't look away. "Their actions are. Their lies. Their cruelty. You didn't break my family. They did." Her hands tightened together. "I just don't want you to regret choosing me over them." "I regret every single day I didn't choose you sooner," he said without hesitation. "I regret letting them control me. I regret letting fear and duty shape a life that never felt like mine." He took a slow breath. "And most of all, I regret not fighting harder for you the moment you disappeared." Avril's eyes glistened, tears she didn't want to let fall. Her voice wavered. "I thought I was protecting you, Andrew. I thought leaving was the only way to give you the future you deserved." He shook his head. "The future I deserved was with you." Silence settled between them again, but it was different now, filled with the awareness of everything they'd lost and everything they might still reclaim. Andrew finally rose from the couch, pulling his phone from his pocket. "I'm calling my mother. She needs to hear from me directly before I go to her in person." Avril reached out and gently touched his hand, stopping him. "Please don't yell," she whispered. "Don't break something you'll never be able to fix." Andrew nodded slowly, though anger pulsed through him like a second heartbeat. He stepped aside and made the call. Each ring tightened the air around him until his mother finally answered. Her tone was smooth, polished, indifferent, as if last night's attempt to parade Lauren beside him had been no more than a social obligation. "Andrew, where did you go last night? You caused quite a scene." He didn't let her finish. "We need to talk. Now. I know everything." A pause. Then her voice sharpened. "What do you mean?" "I know what you said to Avril 2 years ago," he replied. "I know you threatened her. I know you forced her out of my life. And I know you stole my daughters from me." Stunned silence filled the line. His mother inhaled sharply, but before she could speak, Andrew ended the call. Avril watched him with wide eyes, worry etched into her expression. "Are you going to be okay?" she asked softly. "I will be," he said. But I won't let them hurt you again." And he meant it. With every breath in his body. Later that afternoon, Andrew arrived at his parents' estate. His father tried to scold him for leaving the dinner, but Andrew shut him down instantly, his voice filled with a conviction that left no room for debate. His mother attempted excuses, manipulations, denials, but each one shattered under the weight of the truth Andrew had carried for 2 years. "I'm done letting you control my life," he said at last. "I'm done sacrificing my happiness to maintain your perfect image. I'm done letting you hurt the people I love." His mother stared at him as if seeing him for the first time, realizing she no longer held any power. His father fell silent, stunned by the son who finally refused to bend. When Andrew returned to the penthouse hours later, exhausted but resolute, Avril was sitting on the floor beside the girls, who were playing with soft blocks. She looked up at him with uncertainty, but the moment their eyes met, her breath hitched. He walked toward her slowly and sank onto the floor beside her, feeling the soft weight of one of his daughters crawling into his lap. Her small hand gripped his shirt, and his heart clenched with overwhelming tenderness. "It's over," he whispered, brushing his hand over the toddler's hair. "They can't control anything anymore." Avril stared at him, her eyes filling with relief, disbelief, and something deeper, something fragile and hopeful. "What happens now?" she asked. Andrew looked at the little girl in his arms, then at the woman he had spent 2 years mourning. He felt his heart settle into a certainty he had never known before. "Now," he said softly, "we start rebuilding. Together. No more running. No more fear. No more lies." And though the road ahead was uncertain, one thing was clear: this time, he wouldn't let anything tear them apart again. Andrew quickly learned that life with 3 toddlers could dismantle even the most rigid routines he'd lived by for years. His world, once defined by silence, polished glass, and structured schedules, was now overtaken by tiny footsteps, scattered toys, squeals of laughter, and the kind of chaos that felt strangely comforting. There were mornings when he woke to soft giggles echoing down the hallway, afternoons spent watching the girls chase each other across the living room carpet, and evenings where lullabies replaced the constant stream of business calls that had once dominated his home. The transformation felt surreal at first, but slowly it began to feel like something he'd been missing his entire life without realizing it. Avril, initially cautious and tense, gradually relaxed into the rhythm of the penthouse. At first she moved around like a visitor, uncertain where she was allowed to be and where she should keep her distance. She apologized each time one of the girls knocked over a vase or smeared peanut butter on the marble counter, but Andrew found himself unable to care about any of it. He replaced the vase without a second thought, cleaned the counter with a laugh, and told her repeatedly that nothing in this home mattered half as much as seeing the girls safe and happy. His reassurance slowly eased the stiffness in her shoulders, and by the end of the first week she looked far less like someone bracing for disaster and more like someone learning how to breathe again. The girls, though identical in appearance, revealed startlingly distinct personalities the longer Andrew spent time with them. Mia, the boldest of the 3, had a habit of climbing anything she could reach, including the back of the couch, the dining chairs, and once, to Avril's horror, the coffee table. Lily was quieter but curious, drawn to anything that made noise or had buttons, which meant Andrew had to baby-proof his entire sound system. And Rose, the smallest, was fiercely attached to Avril and watched Andrew with wide, cautious eyes, as if studying him to decide whether he was trustworthy. He made it his mission to win her over gently, sitting on the floor while she observed him, handing her blocks without speaking, reading books aloud even if she refused to sit on his lap. One afternoon, completely unprompted, Rose crawled into his arms during story time and leaned her head against his chest. The moment was so unexpected and so precious that Andrew froze, hardly daring to breathe until Avril silently wiped a tear from her cheek across the room. Every evening, after the triplets fell asleep, the atmosphere between Andrew and Avril shifted into something quieter and deeper. They sat together on the couch, sometimes talking, sometimes simply sharing the silence. At first their conversations were cautious, circling around practical matters, doctor appointments, sleeping schedules, baby food preferences, but as days passed, they grew more personal. Avril confessed how terrified she'd been giving birth alone, how overwhelming it was raising 3 infants without support, how many nights she cried from exhaustion. Andrew listened with a heaviness in his chest, hating the thought of her struggling while he lived unaware just miles away. In return, he shared pieces of himself he hadn't revealed even when they were together years ago. He told her about the emptiness he'd felt after she vanished, the way he threw himself into work to survive each day, the sleepless nights that eventually forced him into therapy, something his family had always dismissed as weakness. Avril listened without judgment, and with each confession, Andrew felt the barrier between them crumble a little more. There was a moment one night, lingering and unspoken, when Avril reached out to take his hand. Her fingers curled around his gently, and he didn't think he had breathed since. They stayed like that for several long minutes, hands intertwined, neither speaking, both knowing that something fragile and hopeful was beginning to form again. They didn't rush it. They didn't label it. They simply existed in the small, intimate quiet that felt more meaningful than the love they'd once shared, because now it was built on truth rather than innocence. Still, despite the warmth growing between them, Avril carried shadows that didn't disappear overnight. Sometimes, when the girls cried unexpectedly, she'd tense and glance toward the door as if expecting someone to burst in. When she and Andrew disagreed, even lightly, Avril's eyes flickered with a fear of being punished, a response conditioned by 2 years of isolation and pressure. Andrew never raised his voice. He never touched her without permission. Whenever she recoiled out of instinct, he simply stepped back and waited, giving her space until she realized she was safe. Gradually, she stopped flinching. Gradually, she began to trust him again. One night, as the rain pattered softly against the windows, Andrew walked into the living room to find Avril curled up on the couch with a blanket draped over her lap. She was staring out at the city lights, deep in thought. He approached carefully, sensing something heavy lingering in the air. She turned toward him slowly. "I thought they'd grow up without a father," she admitted quietly. "I thought I'd have to lie to them, tell them you didn't want them. And the thought of doing that broke me, Andrew. It broke me every day." He sat beside her, close but not touching. "You'll never have to lie," he said. "Not now. Not ever. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." Her throat tightened, and she looked down at her hands. "I keep waiting for this to fall apart," she whispered. "For someone to take it away." Andrew gently reached out and placed a hand over hers. "No one is taking anything away from you ever again," he said, his voice quiet but full of conviction. "Not my parents. Not anyone. This is our family now." Avril's eyes filled with tears, but for the first time since she'd returned, they weren't tears of guilt or fear, they were tears of relief. She leaned into him slowly, as though testing whether he'd pull away. Instead, he wrapped an arm around her shoulders, drawing her close against his chest. She relaxed into him fully, letting her head rest beneath his chin. The moment felt like an answer to a question they had both been afraid to ask: could they find each other again after everything that had happened? As they sat together, the city glowing beyond the glass and the soft breaths of their daughters drifting down the hallway, Andrew realized something with a clarity that left him breathless. He wasn't just falling back in love with Avril. He had never stopped. And for the first time since she returned, Avril allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she had found her way home. Andrew never expected peace to feel so fragile. For days, maybe even weeks, the rhythm of life between him, Avril, and the girl settled into something warm and almost domestic, but a quiet undercurrent of tension remained beneath every gentle moment. It wasn't between him and Avril; if anything, their connection had grown deeper, steadier, but around them, life outside the penthouse had begun to stir. Rumors were circulating among board members about Andrew's sudden absence from several public events. Investors whispered about the mysterious woman seen at the restaurant. Journalists speculated about his refusal to continue appearing with Lauren Hart. And then there were his parents, who, despite Andrew's warnings and confrontation, refused to retreat quietly into the background. His mother had been silent for days after their explosive argument, which terrified Andrew more than if she had yelled or threatened him outright. He knew her patterns well. Silence meant calculation, and calculation meant she was preparing a move. He tried to hide his worry from Avril, not wanting to burden her or taint the fragile sense of safety she was finally beginning to feel, but she noticed anyway. She was perceptive, too perceptive, especially when it came to reading him. Late one evening, while the triplets slept peacefully in their room, Andrew stood alone on the balcony overlooking the city. The cool night breeze brushed against his skin, but it wasn't enough to cool the tension building in his chest. He needed to think. He needed to plan. The more he replayed the last conversation with his mother, the more convinced he became that she wouldn't simply accept defeat. She wasn't the type to let her son choose his own path if it deviated from the one she crafted for him. He had just begun assembling strategies in his mind, legal protections for the girls, a plan for announcing them to the public, potential fallout among investors, when he felt the slightest tug on his shirt. He turned, surprised, and found Avril standing there, barefoot and wrapped in one of his sweaters. Her hair was loose, falling in soft waves over her shoulders, and her eyes were shadowed with worry. "You're thinking too loudly," she said gently. He exhaled, not realizing how tense his shoulders had become. "I'm fine," he said automatically, but she stepped closer, shaking her head. "You're not," she answered softly. "You're scared. And you're trying so hard to hide it because you think if you tell me what you're worried about, I'll run again." Andrew swallowed hard at the accuracy of her words. She placed her hand over his heart, and he felt the warmth of her fingers seep through the fabric. "I'm not running," she whispered. "Not anymore. Not even if things get hard." Those words broke something in him, something tight, something painful, something he hadn't realized he was still holding on to. He pulled her gently toward him, wrapping his arms around her as if afraid she might fade into the night. She rested her head on his chest and breathed deeply, grounding him in a way nothing else could. After a moment, she spoke again. "Whatever your mother is planning, whatever happens, we'll handle it together." He closed his eyes, letting her words sink in. "I just don't want her to hurt you again," he murmured. "Or the girls. I won't let it happen." Avril pulled back to look at him, her expression steadier than he expected. "She can't hurt me the way she did before," she said quietly. "Because I'm not alone this time. And neither are you." They went back inside together, but by the next morning, Andrew realized just how right he had been to worry. His assistant, Harper, arrived unexpectedly and knocked on the penthouse door. Andrew braced himself for news and stepped into the hallway before she could see Avril or the children. The moment he saw Harper's pale face, he knew something was wrong. "Tell me," he demanded quietly. She hesitated before handing him a tablet. On the screen was an email from the board of directors, requesting an emergency meeting. Attached was a file, a scandalous, carefully curated dossier detailing Avril's disappearance, her background, her lack of elite education, and the existence of the triplets. It was written with a tone that twisted the truth into something sinister, suggesting she had manipulated Andrew, endangered the company's reputation, and plotted to use the children to gain power. A signature at the bottom confirmed what Andrew already knew. His mother was behind it. He felt the fury rising inside him, dark and sharp, but he forced himself to breathe. Harper swallowed nervously. "They're expecting you today. Your mother intends to propose appointing you as CEO with conditions that include separating from Avril permanently. And denying the children publicly." Andrew's grip tightened around the tablet until his knuckles whitened. "Over my dead body," he muttered, his voice low and dangerous. He walked back into the living room, but the second Avril saw his face, her expression fell. "What happened?" she asked, standing up quickly. He didn't want to tell her. He didn't want to break the fragile peace they'd begun to build. But hiding the truth would be worse. He handed her the tablet. She scanned the file, her hands trembling. By the time she finished, she looked physically ill. "She's trying to erase them," Avril whispered. "She's trying to erase me." Andrew stepped toward her and cupped her face gently in his hands. "She won't succeed," he said firmly. "I won't let her." Avril's voice broke. "She's going to turn the world against us." "No," he said. "She's going to expose herself. Because this time I'm fighting back." Her lower lip trembled, but she nodded, the fear in her eyes slowly hardening into something stronger. "What do you need me to do?" "Stay here and take care of the girls," Andrew said. "I'll handle the board. I'll handle her. I promise." "And if she tries to take the company from you?" Avril asked quietly. Andrew gave a slow, determined smile. "Then I'll build a new one. One they'll never be a part of." As he turned toward the door, Avril grabbed his hand and squeezed it tightly, grounding him with a strength he didn't know she had. "Come back to us," she whispered. "I will," he said. "You're my home now." And with that, he walked out, straight into the storm his mother had unleashed, ready to fight the battle he should have fought years ago. Andrew entered the boardroom with the kind of calm that only came from a man who had already decided he would not lose. Not this time. Not again. The room was filled with the usual faces, executives in tailored suits, shareholders who had watched him grow up, and board members who prided themselves on loyalty to the Keller legacy. But today, their expressions were guarded, curious, uncertain. And at the center of the far end of the table sat his mother, immaculate as always, dressed in muted tones that reflected dignity and control. She didn't look surprised to see him. She looked prepared. He took his seat at the head of the table, claiming the position before she could speak. For a moment, silence stretched across the room, thick and expectant. Andrew didn't look at her. Instead, he addressed the board directly. "I assume you received the allegations circulated this morning," he said, his voice even and commanding. "And I assume you expect an explanation. You'll get one. But not the one my mother intended." Several members shifted uncomfortably, and his father leaned back in his seat, frowning. His mother opened her mouth to speak, but Andrew raised a hand, not disrespectfully, but with absolute authority. She froze. "Before you hear anything else," he continued, "I want to make something very clear. Everything in that dossier is true, except the intent behind it. Except the poison woven into the way it was written. I do have 3 daughters. They are 2 years old. They are innocent, extraordinary, and they are mine. Their mother is the woman I love. And the only scandal here is that certain people thought they had the right to control my life, to rewrite my future, and to manipulate my family without consequence." A murmur rippled across the table. His mother's face tightened, but she remained silent, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. Andrew stood, walking around the table slowly, forcing each board member to meet his eyes. "You all know me. You know the leader I am. You've watched me rebuild this company's reputation, secure new markets, expand our global reach, and stabilize what was once a precarious financial decline. I have never let my personal life interfere with my responsibilities." He paused, letting the words linger. "But some of you allowed my personal life to be weaponized against me." He turned toward his mother at last. The tension between them thickened the air. "When Avril left 2 years ago, I thought she abandoned me. I thought she disappeared by choice. I was wrong. She was threatened. Manipulated. Terrified into running. And I lost years, of knowing my children because of actions done in my name. His mother finally rose, her composure threatening to crack. Andrew, you are exaggerating. I did what I had to do. I protected this family. I ensured you didn't throw away everything. You ensured I suffered, Andrew cut in sharply, though his voice never rose. You ensured my daughters grew up without a father. You ensured a woman who loved me more than anything was forced into hiding. And you ensured this company was used as leverage to control me. That is not protection. That is destruction. His words echoed in the room. His mother stood speechless, and the board, many of whom admired him, looked between them with dawning recognition. Andrew placed both hands on the table, leaning forward. You distributed a file filled with twisted truths and malicious implications. Not to protect the company, but to punish me for choosing my own life. And I will not allow a board of directors, or a family member, to weaponize my children ever again. He took a breath, steady and unshakable. I am not resigning. I am not stepping back. If anyone has concerns about my leadership, you can state them now. But understand that I will pursue legal action against anyone continuing to harass or endanger the mother of my children. One of the older board members cleared his throat. Andrew, no one doubts your ability to lead. We were misled into believing this was a threat to the company's reputation. Another added, it seems the threat wasn't the family you chose, but the interference you experienced. His mother's expression shifted, first disbelief, then panic, then something sharp and wounded. She had expected obedience. Instead, she found opposition from every direction. Andrew met her eyes one last time. You said my daughters would destroy the Keller name, he said quietly. But protecting them is the first thing that has ever made me proud of it. He dismissed the meeting. Some members approached him with reassurances and apologies. Others left quietly, processing everything. His father remained seated, staring at him as if seeing him for the first time, but Andrew didn't linger. There was somewhere far more important he needed to be. He returned to the penthouse before sunset. He expected tension or questions from Avril, but instead he found her sitting on the rug with the girls, laughing as Mia tried to feed Lily a handful of crackers. The simple, pure joy in the room stopped Andrew in the doorway. Avril looked up when she sensed him there. For a moment, the room felt suspended in time. Then she stood, her expression searching his face. You're back, she whispered, half in disbelief, half in relief. I told you I would be, he said, stepping closer. What happened? She asked softly. It's over, he answered. Completely over. They won't touch you. They won't touch our girls. They won't touch us. The board supports me. And my mother, lost. Avril's breath escaped in a tremor, her hand covering her mouth as tears filled her eyes, not from fear, but from the release of fear. Andrew reached for her, pulling her gently into his arms. She collapsed against him, her shoulders shaking with silent emotion while their daughters toddled around their legs, unaware of the gravity of what had changed. You're safe, he whispered into her hair. You're all safe now. She looked up at him, eyes glistening. What happens now? She asked, the same question she had asked once before, but now with hope instead of dread. He cupped her face gently. Now we build the life we were supposed to have, he said. Not because it's perfect, but because it's ours. Avril leaned into his touch, her forehead resting against his. I never stopped loving you, she whispered. Not even when I was gone. Andrew closed his eyes, the weight of her words anchoring him in a way nothing else ever had. I never stopped loving you either. And I never will. Their daughters crawled into their laps then, giggling, demanding attention and warmth, and the two of them held their little family close. The chaos felt beautiful. The future felt possible. And for the first time in years, Andrew felt whole.